Hey guys, this is Ellie and I am doing a book review on how to survive the loss of a child. Filling the Emptiness and Rebuilding Your Life by Catherine M. Sanders, PhD. And I was given this book by someone who attended a conference with a lady who had lost their child and was suffering terribly through the process of grief. And a wonderful friend of hers knocked on the door, handed her to the book, and just left her with that book, you know, not intruding, not trying to make her feel better, and all the placades people will try because they want to help but they don't know what words to say. So this woman found it very useful, and it has got her up and helping her get back into life. So now she does speeches at conferences and things like that. So on the back here it says, it is only through experiencing grief that bereaved parents ultimately heal. Moving through the phases of grief, the bereaved person works towards restoration. Understanding these phases, knowing what to expect, and learning what they can do to help themselves gives parents greater assurance and comfort. Now, Catherine lost her own child as well through a boating accident, and it took her many years before she did a research group through the different types of grief, the different family members that have passed. And through that research, a parent losing a child was significantly the highest grief. And through many essays and notes from parents, which she's included into the book, it has really given a tale. So in my experience, my personal experience, I'm just in a stunned state of shock and feel very much alone and feel like nobody else understands. And by reading this book, it makes me feel included. It makes me feel like somebody else does understand, the grief process, how I'm feeling. And it's actually feeling more comforting to know that, this is normal. These emotions that I'm feeling, the way that I live my life at the moment, that's all normal. It's part of the process. So what I did was I put some tabs into parts that I thought really struck with me. So we will start with the pink ones first, and each one that I've tabbed is a different emotional. So in this part it says the parents-child bond must be relinquished. When the child dies, the parents grieve, not only for the deprivation of being without their child, but also for lost aspects of themselves. Identification is experienced so personally that parents often report actually feeling the impact that killed their child or suffering the pain that accompanied the fatal illness. And this very much relates to how I feel as well. The next one I tabbed is the pain is like an open sore that fails to heal. Time and time again, a temporary scar forms, only to break open again with no warning. The agonizing intensity of the hurt rocks the very depth of our being, and we feel as if we will be permanently damaged and emotionally dislodged by this tragic event. We are afraid we will never fully recover, yet we learn to survive. We learn to move on into a strange new life until we finally come to terms with a different world. Things are never the same. Now that touches true to me, because that's exactly how I'm feeling. And some days I feel that very strongly, and other times I feel like, that's there and that this is normal and that the process will continue. After the death of a child, the job is even harder. We hardly understand ourselves. Nothing makes sense, not our feelings, not our perceptions, not even our thoughts. I'm convinced that we all go a little crazy in grief. And I can't tell you how many times I've said that out loud. I feel like I've gone completely crazy. This isn't me anymore, and I don't recognize myself. And I feel like everything stopped when Jack's heart stopped. That eerie feeling of my head on his chest and there was nothing. And at that moment, a part of me stopped and was stunned and hasn't really started up again. So that sentence there really resonates with me. Another one, the child has become the centre of their life, an important love object upon whom they doted night and day. which very much is how I lived. I looked after Jake 24 hours a day. It was, every decision was around him, and that physical and emotional impact, daily, 24 hours a day. And now that I don't do that, the day is completely empty and very lonely and very quiet. The next one, the house is empty of the sound of their voices, just as empty as the hearts of the parents. The death of a child at any age leaves the survivors in an intense state of shock and disbelief, lost in their own grief, unable to free their emotions to continue with their recovery. They remain frozen in their memory of the perfect child. Now, this specifically touches me because this is just focusing on terminal illnesses. When there is a diagnosis of a terminal disease, shock at hearing about the severity of the disease is the parent's initial response. It was mine. This is usually followed by a long period of reasonable denial, during which they understandably push for the best treatment and the best doctors. There is a need to know as much about the condition as possible, a tremendous need to understand what is happening to their child. There is hope for a cure, a remission, or a miracle. All this gives the parents an opportunity to accept the reality of the disease. The parents begin anticipating mourning for their child. When the dying takes place over time, this bit I don't quite agree with. The shock of death is less intense than that in case of sudden loss, in which there is no preparation. I thought that too. I thought that because I was expecting it, that I would be better prepared, and I was wrong, because he rallied so many times, at least 7 times I can count, and through that relief, and then, working towards keeping him alive longer and, riding that wave, and let's just get through this moment. Even when I knew it was happening, it was still a complete and utter state of shock. So I don't agree with that. The pain, the agony of separation are similar. The parents are primary caregivers. They feel emptiness and a lack of purpose when they are no longer having their sick child to take care of. Their physical exhaustion often matches their emotional exhaustion. When a child dies, many survivors feel that some cosmic force has singled the parents out for this painful, catastrophic event. And that's another thing I was saying before, the house is so empty, the day is so long, the day is no longer full. All that running around, keeping control, the decisions, it just was so much work. And now that that's not there, it's like everything has changed completely. It is hard to tolerate so much pain for very long. But grief is not like that. It is a long, complex process. So much depends on such factors as ambivalence towards or dependence on the dead child, how many people we have supporting us, what is the state of our health crisis that we are faced with at the same time, how we react to stress. A multitude of variables enter into resolving grief. So, things can be made easier if you do have a good support system, family and friends. It doesn't make it, a fly-through, grief experience. Everybody will experience their own. But to have that support will definitely help, I feel, because I have the lack of that. Another one, be willing instead to go through the phases of grief, not to turn away from the pain, but to walk into it. You won't be the same person you were when your child was alive. Having survived the worst thing that can happen, you need never be afraid of anything again. When we are in grief, we feel more insecure, out of control than at any other time in our lives. Feeling out of control causes us to be afraid. Letting go of control and being out of control are two entirely different things, however. Being out of control implies a total loss of control over everything, ourselves, our environment, and others. It is sometimes that something that happens against our wills. On the other hand, letting go of control is an act of faith. Soft grief is the acceptance of pain. It is the acknowledgement of separation and the need to rearrange our lives to fit the present reality. Soft grief is intensely painful, but once it is over, healing takes place. And I feel that resonates as well, because the idea of being in control of every single second of the day to keep him alive, the medicines, the staff from the hospitals, every single thing had to be minute details, had to be perfect. And when that is gone and you now feel like you have no control at all, and it is insecurity, and it is fear of making decisions, because that stability is now gone. Her mind would race from one thing to another. Recovery was slow. Just when she felt a little bit better, she would slide back into another bout. Try to get some enthusiasm for the day, but in only a little while she would fall back into bed or collapse on the couch. Her doctor explained, "You're completely exhausted, what we call battle fatigue. You have been using all your energy trying to deny your grief and at the same time keeping a back-breaking schedule." What was happening was you were burning your own high-powered drug, adrenaline. It kept you going, but it also weakened your immune system. Your body called a halt and put you in bed with the flu. Our bodies have a way of taking over when there is a need. You just didn't hear it earlier because you were so in denial. She knew she was very tired and at last seemed willing to have others take over. This period of quiet is exactly what we need to assimilate life slowly, moving back into life after the monumental shift that you are no longer that mother, that carer, that person. Everything has changed. And that adrenaline, I very much felt that from 2015. It started 2016 August on, and right through to his death at May. No sleep, very little help, and the only thing that kept me going was adrenaline and coffee. But I look back and think, how can a human being do everything with 1 to 2 hours sleep a night? And it's just mother's love and adrenaline to do that. When we lose a significant person through death, our lives are never the same again. We are changed through the long process of bereavement. There has been an ending, and we must adjust to a world without the dearly loved person. And it really does feel like that. Life as I knew it has ended with Jake and then after Jake. It's 2 different lives, 2 different worlds. And it really does feel like I have started completely new in a very foreign terrain. So that strikes very true to me. How do you live without a part of yourself after an amputation? The answer is you have no choice. You adapt. Adapting to the death of a child is analogous to learning to walk again without a leg. First, you depend on a walker, a crutch, finally a prosthesis. This takes you nearly as many places as your leg did, but you know the difference. A change has been made. You are never the same after a significant loss. In the early phases of grief, you lose confidence in yourself and in the world. Your trust is badly shaken. Your insecurity is pronounced. You find it difficult to take charge of your life again. You don't know how to do it or even where to begin. And that's me. That's how I feel right now. And it's very difficult to be this new version of me when the old version of me had complete control. Everything was perfect. Everything was done to the minutest detail. And to be this person who's vulnerable and has fear and doesn't know the smallest things, it's quite a rude awakening, and it's quite scary about what to do next. That one special child has gone, and somehow you must learn to structure your life without him. Your identity used to be based on a life of interacting with your child, but that child is now gone. So specific quotes that I found just for Jake and myself. She felt she was watching herself go through the motions during the funeral. She didn't feel as if she was there, experiencing a psychological distancing, a mechanism that protects us when we are in severe distress. It is a means we use to emotionally remove ourselves from a situation when it's just too painful to face. There would be joyous times when the family was full of hope. There are other times of grief, pain, and despair. This is very much Jake. His frail little body exhausted from years of treatment, his parents broken with grief and feelings of failure. They couldn't rally another time. When the child did occur, the shock was strong. The impact is amazing. Even when we know death is inevitable, we try to prepare ourselves for it. There is no way to anticipate how empty and awful it feels when it happens. They thought they were prepared. They had talked about it. They had even visualized what it would be like. The funeral, the flowers, the empty bedroom. And yet they really couldn't know the pain until their beloved child was gone. And that's just the feeling I had, because Jake had been close to death many times. They said that he wouldn't make it through the night, and it was so traumatic every time that happened, at least 7 times. And at this moment, your brain can trick you and think that this will be another one of those. Even when the doctor looked me square in the face and said, well, this is the day. And somewhere in the back of my mind there was that hope, that glimmer of, he might just surprise them. He has before, and he could rally himself. But this time he really couldn't, because his body had just broken. The intense emotional disorganization, the full awareness that your child is dead, feels like an unbearable weight on your chest. You try to breathe deeply. You can't. You can only breathe shallowly. I've heard that people breathe shallowly when they don't want to feel. I remember that I didn't want to hurt, but I did, no matter how I breathed. Maybe there are certain circumstances where the pain is so deep that it is untouchable. When we lose a child, an attachment is broken, an attachment that was deeply integrated into our very being. It is like losing half of ourselves with no way to grow back the half that is gone. The pain of grief comes from sudden wrenching away of that part of ourselves, and the pain is excruciating. Separation anxiety is a major component of the second phase. Fear and anxiety are far more characteristic of this period than depression. We feel afraid. The loss of control we feel in regard to our child's death begins to apply to everything. All the things we had counted on now seem shaky and unsure. The world is no longer predictable, and we become unsure of our footing. There is no safe place. And that's exactly how I'm feeling at the moment. Nothing feels stable and nothing feels sure, and every single decision seems momentous, and losing that confidence now that everything is final. It's like I am a new person with a different brain, and I can't handle the smallest of decisions. This is another part very much relating to Jake. The parents questioned if they could have done more. He was such a patient little boy. He had never complained, and her heart began to ache for him in a different, more intensely painful way. The same feeling of helplessness and powerlessness that plagued him during the later part of his life came back again in full force. He'd been such a focus of attention and love for so long that somewhere in their awareness they felt that he was the most important one. But he died and they didn't. But I couldn't tell them what I needed because I didn't know myself. When our child dies, it hurts more than anything we can imagine. In the beginning of grief, we are destitute because we can't know that the pain will end. Certainly there is no assurance that it will ever end. Probably grief's most important lesson is faith. Faith that even in the blackest moments of despair, a clearing will appear somewhere up ahead. There will be a better time. They do come. I promise you that they will. And that's how I feel very often. I feel like this is what it's going to be like forever and that nothing will ever change. And I feel like that's very frustrating. This is a quote from one of the bereaved parents. I had this feeling as though something beyond my control, beyond the world, had really done a dirty, lousy deal, and I had no control over it. And when I would feel like shaking my fist, it wasn't to do anything in particular, but maybe just to the total frustration of this thing happening and not being able to fight back decently with it. It's such an uncontrollable situation that you're in. And this is a quote that very much relates to me because he died in my arms. And at that moment, you start to plead with God or the angels at that desperation point of this is real, this is happening, and if you could do anything at all to stop it. So these words really do hit home of a parent of a very sick child. Mitzi, please don't die. You can't die. God, she's cold. So cold. Mitzi, breathe. Please breathe. She's gone. I know it. No, it can't be. She can't be dead. Help me. God, help me. You can't be dead. Oh God, this is real. It can't be. She couldn't face the reality of the event, so she facilitated between denial and wishful yearning that nothing had ever happened. Our helplessness, our inability to save our children generates guilt. One of the fathers said to me, I stood by my baby's hospital bed praying, begging, really for my little girl to be healed. I offered everything I owned if God would just make her well again. I did, and it didn't work. I had to wait there helplessly as she grew worse every day. However, after a child has died, our memories of these emotions swell up to gigantic proportions and we admonish ourselves for ever feeling ambivalent. The self-torture that follows is often relentless. I was exhausted all the time, and she demanded so much attention. She always did. I was overwhelmed with so much responsibility. Then after she was gone, I couldn't believe I'd felt that way. I was too ashamed to talk about that with anyone about it. I really hated myself. I'd give anything to be up at night with her now. And I'm the same. When I was in that situation, I had no sleep for so long. But if I could do that again, I would do that for a few more years just to have him back. The death of a child means loss on many levels. A part of oneself, the future, a love object, both in giving and receiving, and oftentimes the main reason for living. Losing all these valuable parts of life at one time often causes a feeling of deprivation that seems impossible to deal with. The result is helpless rage. As the child's disease progressed, the family members grew stronger in their mutual bond. The paradox was that, as the child grew weaker physically, he appeared to grow stronger in the family's love. Death was not the feared enemy any longer, silence was. This family was able to continue in its strength after the child died, sharing the pain and loss, helping each other, always remembering what they said, the lessons that the child had taught them. Jake had an operation once where there was very little chance he would survive it, and I didn't tell him that. I just smiled and sent him off so he wasn't afraid, and I waited and waited, holding my breath until he came out, and it was successful. And so this very much touches home with me for that reason, and then also because Jack's only worry was about me and me being okay. The day of the operation was frightening. Jenny, before she was anaesthetised, was consoling her parents, telling them she would be fine, and it would cure her heart trouble once and for all. She wouldn't be the heavy financial responsibility anymore. Helen broke down then to think of her daughter taking care of them at such a time. Helen had replayed this scene in her mind 1,000,000 times since then. Jenny died before the operation was over. Hope, which had gone and been such a motivating force for her life, was now completely gone. Now, those were all of the quotes that I had for parts that struck me personally. Now, these ones here are how we are moving forward through this. It takes emotional courage to resolve grief, and we can't do this alone. And very important, he needed to learn that he could not fix everything. In grief, we need to experience our pain and not have it removed as if someone could. They provide the opportunity for us to outwardly express our sorrow in a socially approved atmosphere. Funerals and celebrations bring support from the community, and they are standing with us. We are not alone in our grief. Perhaps more importantly, the funeral provides spiritual strength, just at a time when we feel total despair, loss of control, and unprecedented emotional pain. The rituals of mourning supply the glue that holds us together through these awful first days. Not only it validates us at a time when we feel weak, vulnerable and insecure, but it validates the life of our child as well. Recognition is given to both the one who died and the ones who must now begin their bereavement. The shock of the event created a screen around me and blocked out the horrible reality. I felt as if I was watching myself go through the motions. I didn't feel like me. I was a world apart. Just at the time we are expected to make important decisions, we are agonizing over our loss and blindly groping for any possibility that would tell us this was not real. That their shared grief encouraged her to go on. She began to feel a little stronger, and that her friends and family were crying with her. After we have lost a child, we feel more vulnerable than we ever did before. Our confidence and trust has been badly shattered. We feel different from others, and we are certain that no one else has felt this way before. Each day, our grief brings us a step closer to the peace and serenity we are looking for. At some point, we begin to believe that the struggle to survive this horrible tragedy will one day be over. It helps to know we are not alone in our suffering, that we haven't been singled out. Through grief, we become more understanding and more compassionate. Maybe renewal comes because our bodies are more rested and the previous phase has exercised so much sadness. As we step out of our passive hibernations, we begin to take more control over our lives. But there are roles that need to be surrendered. A new identity is required for each of us. We are not the same people we were before, but who are we? This phase is one of searching for the meaning in the loss, forgiving as well as forgetting the awful circumstances that surrounded the death. He also had to say goodbye to Tommy and let him go. That was the hardest task of all because it was part of himself that he was letting go. But until he did that, he was not ready to live again. The loss of a child requires more restructuring of identity than any other loss. Our identification with our child is so strong that it takes years to actively let go of that connection. It is the letting go, however, that finally allows the shift in our identity. Find a reason for his son's death has now turned his attention towards searching for the meaning in his son's life, which is what I'm doing now. I'm using that journey of how this has impacted me to find the meaning of my life and the purpose of my journey, and how I can incorporate that into my new life and what was the purpose of it all. Grief is like a death and a resurrection experience. As the old roles and identities are released, new well springs of the life trickle within us. We are not the same people as before, but within us we have the potential to develop a new strength that will spread over all our relationships and activities. We become more tolerant and have deeper compassion to share with others. In essence, we must take responsibility for our own happiness if we are to find it. The process of giving up your old role as a parent, as a caregiver, for their parents as conventional husband and wife, a new self-awareness that gives them the confidence to move on with their lives, not the same old life that they lived for others, but new lives that focused on their inner needs. External caring is analogous to sympathy. It represents a typical behavior, a problem-solving approach, and is often seen as manipulative. External caring says, I recognize your plight. I see you are at a different in your struggle. I see you are going through a rough time, but I am not with you. I do not have to go through this. You do. I will help if you ask me, but I will not intrude on your pain. It is yours, not mine. I will solve your problems for you as long as they are short-term. Otherwise, I have my own problems to take care of. And that is a lot of people who want to just fix it, or want to use mindfulness, or they don't understand the emotional impact. So they almost treat it like being dumped, or a 3-step process to get life sorted, when sometimes for you or for anybody else who is a friend or family of a person who has lost someone, the other one that I'm going to, the internal caring, is more nurturing and it's more helpful, I found. Internal caring is a more nurturing way to approach a person. As such, it is more in line with empathy than sympathy. Internal caring says, I am hurting with you. I see your pain and I know you hurt. Though I do not know exactly what you are feeling, I do know your grief is more serious. I will be here to support you. I will not judge. I will love you all the while, respect the struggle you are going through, and admire your courage and supply what strength I can for you. You are given no choice in this matter, but if more than one person shares the pain, it will help. I will not offer advice unless you ask, and I will offer it only tentatively. I recognize you need to maintain control over your life. And the last one. Don't minimize the bereaved grief by relating your own stories of death and sickness, offering cliches such as, aren't you glad you had him for that number of years? Only angers the grieving parents. Bereaved parents are thinking of nothing else but their dead child. Any attempt to distract the griever by talking of trivia may result in resentment on their part. Be a non-judgmental listener. Do not offer advice about how they should think or feel. And that is very true. Many people say, well, it's time to move on. It's time to get back into the world. His pain is gone. You had him for so many years. None of those things help. So all in all, that is the book, How to Survive the Loss of a Child, Filling the Emptiness and Rebuilding Your Life by Catherine M. Sanders, PhD. So I would give this book 5 stars. Not only could I relate, but I felt like I was one of a group, that there are people worldwide who have gone through this or going through this now, and it really was very helpful to me. And also the different chapters explaining how people have felt very much resonated with me and made me feel like I wasn't going crazy, like I was very normal, and that this is, you know, part of the process. And the last part that really I think has made a difference is that no matter how bad it feels at the time, and no matter how sad and hopeless and alone or frightened and scared about what decision to make next, because everything is so foreign, the message that keeps coming back through the book is that at some stage life will feel better, and that no matter whether it's longer or shorter, because there is no perfect grieving, but it will happen at some stage. So 5 stars from me. Brilliant book. Recommend it to someone who is grieving. A personal recommendation from me. It's been 18 months since my son has passed, and I will be reading it again through moments that I need it, just to remind me that there is going to be an end of suffering at some stage. So I hope you've liked that book review. 5 stars from me, and I shall see you on the next video. Be kind to you and those you love. And from Jedi Side Jake, may the Force be with you.